It's funny how some of the most ordinary days can spiral into something unforgettable. I wasn't planning on doing anything special that morning, just the usual routine. Wake up, hit snooze 3 times, and grumble my way through making coffee. It was one of those crisp mornings where the air felt like it had been scrubbed clean overnight, and sunlight poured through my kitchen window like liquid gold. I remember standing there, mug in hand, staring at the steam curling upward, thinking, maybe I should do something different today. I wasn't expecting that thought to stick. By noon, I found myself driving toward the edge of town with no particular destination in mind. There's a road that runs parallel to the river, one of those winding routes where trees form a tunnel overhead, and in the right season, the leaves turn into a kaleidoscope of color. That day, everything was a vibrant green, the kind that makes you roll down your windows just to smell the freshness of the world waking up. I ended up pulling into an old parking lot I hadn't thought about in years. It used to be the meeting spot for my friends and me back in high school, just a cracked stretch of asphalt beside a faded basketball court. The place hadn't changed much. The rusted chain-link fence still sagged under the weight of time, and someone had painted new graffiti over the old layers like colorful scars telling 1,000 stories. I got out, stretched my legs, and kicked a loose pebble across the lot. Memories flickered back. Late nights with cheap sodas, blaring music from someone's beat-up car, and endless conversations about what the future might hold. I don't know what compelled me to wander toward the court, but as I stepped onto the faded lines, I noticed something glinting near the edge, half buried under dirt and debris. Curiosity got the better of me, and I crouched down, brushing away the grime until my fingers closed around a tarnished key. Just a simple thing, really worn metal, no markings, but holding it sent a strange jolt through me, like it was unlocking more than just some forgotten door. That's when I heard the laughter. Not in a creepy way, more like the echo of a memory surfacing. Turning around, I half expected to see my teenage self leaning against the fence, grinning at the absurdity of it all. Instead, there was just the wind and the sound of leaves rustling. I pocketed the key, shook my head, and chuckled. "Get a grip," I muttered. But something about that moment shifted the whole day off its axis. Instead of heading back to my car, I started walking along the path that led down to the river. The trail was overgrown but familiar, like an old friend who'd let themselves go but still welcomed you with open arms. The air was thick with the scent of pine and moss, and every step seemed to peel away layers of stress I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. By the time I reached the water, the sun had slid lower, casting everything in a warm amber glow. I sat on a rock by the edge, skipping stones and watching the ripples stretch out toward the horizon. There's something meditative about that simple act, like you're sending tiny messages across time and space, hoping someone on the other side will catch them. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in thought, but eventually, the chill of the evening crept in. Standing up, I glanced back at the path and noticed how the shadows had deepened, twisting familiar shapes into something else entirely. There was a pull, subtle but insistent, urging me to follow the river further than I ever had before. And so I did. That decision, made on a whim, would lead me into a chain of events I never could have predicted. Funny how life works like that. One moment you're making coffee, and the next you're holding a key to a story you didn't know you were part of. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it really began. The next morning, I woke up with the key still in my jacket pocket, the metal cool against my fingertips. I turned it over and over, searching for some kind of clue, but it was just as nondescript as it had been the day before. Still, there was something about it I couldn't shake, a tug at the back of my mind, like a half-remembered dream urging me to dig deeper. Instead of heading straight to work, I drove back to the old parking lot. The morning light filtered through the trees differently this time, casting long streaks of gold and shadow across the cracked pavement. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in, the world feeling unusually still. I walked back toward the basketball court, retracing my steps from the day before, but there was nothing new to find. No sudden revelations, no hidden doors waiting to be unlocked. Frustrated, I slid the key back into my pocket and started back toward my car when a flicker of movement caught my eye. Just beyond the court, half hidden by the overgrowth, was an old chain-link gate I hadn't noticed before. The hinges groaned as I pushed it open, revealing a narrow path snaking through the trees. My heart thumped in my chest, excitement and nerves tangling together. The path led me down to what used to be an old maintenance shed. The roof sagged, and rust streaked down the walls, but the lock on the door was surprisingly intact, and perfectly sized for the key in my pocket. I hesitated. Part of me thought this was ridiculous. The other part, the part that had led me here in the first place, insisted I had to know. I slid the key into the lock, turned with a satisfying click. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint smell of oil. Sunlight streamed in through cracks in the wood, illuminating shelves lined with old tools, faded cans of paint, and boxes stacked high with forgotten odds and ends. Nothing extraordinary, until I noticed a worn leather journal sitting on a workbench, its cover cracked and faded with age. Opening it, I was hit with the scent of old paper and something else, something that smelled faintly like cedar and rain. The first page held a name I didn't recognize, Elliot Harrow. Below it, a date, June 12, 1987. I turned the page and the handwriting flowed in looping, elegant script. It wasn't just notes. It was a record of something bigger, entries detailing places I'd never heard of, cryptic references to coordinates, and mentions of things hidden beneath the surface. I sat down on an overturned bucket, flipping through the pages. Each entry seemed to pull me further down a rabbit hole I hadn't even known existed. Questions spun through my head. Who was Elliot Harrow? Why was his journal hidden in an abandoned shed? And what was it he'd been trying to find or hide? I lost track of time until my phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me back to reality. A missed call from work. I sighed, tucking the journal under my arm. Whatever this was, it wasn't something I could ignore. Not now. Not after finding the key, the gate, the shed. The journal felt like a breadcrumb on a trail that had been waiting for someone to follow. And apparently that someone was me. As I locked the shed behind me and stepped back into the sunlight, I had no idea just how deep that trail was about to go, or how far from ordinary my life was about to become. The following days blurred together in a mix of work obligations and late-night readings of Elliot Harrow's journal. I found myself poring over each entry, tracing my fingers along the faded ink, as if the texture could impart some hidden meaning. There was something mesmerizing about the way he wrote, thoughtful, meticulous, yet tinged with urgency. His words painted a world layered with secrets, one where the mundane overlapped with something deeper, waiting to be unearthed. Elliot described places that didn't exist on any map I could find. Some locations matched local landmarks, overgrown trails, forgotten quarries, but others were mysteries. The hollow beneath the Twin Oaks, the place where the river sings backward, poetic, maybe, or coded. I wasn't sure which possibility intrigued me more. I spent my evenings cross-referencing old town records, local legends, and anything else that might shed light on his cryptic notes. One entry kept pulling at me. They buried it where the earth breathes. I read and reread that line until the words lost meaning, becoming just shapes on a page. But then it clicked. There was an old cave system just outside town, long sealed off after a collapse decades ago. Locals called it the Breathing Caverns because of the way the air would whoosh in and out with the changing temperatures. It seemed too coincidental to ignore. That's how I found myself standing at the edge of those very caverns one drizzly afternoon, journal in hand, heart pounding in my chest. The entrance was blocked by a rusted gate, warning signs plastered everywhere. Trespassing.
Danger. Instable terrain.
My rational brain screamed at me to turn back. But curiosity, fueled by something I couldn't quite name, pushed me forward. I found a section of the fence that had been pried open just enough to squeeze through. Inside, the air grew cooler, dampness clinging to my skin. My flashlight beam wavered as I stepped carefully over loose rocks and debris. The walls closed in, graffiti and moss battling for space along the rough stone. Every sound seemed magnified, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the drip, drip, drip of water echoing somewhere deeper inside. Then I saw it. A faint mark on the wall, matching a sketch from Elliot's journal. An arrow pointing down a narrow passage. I swallowed hard, nerves dancing in my stomach, and followed. What I found wasn't treasure, at least not in the conventional sense. At the end of the passage lay a small alcove, half hidden by a fallen slab of rock. Beneath it, a metal box rested in the dirt, rusted but intact. My hands shook as I pried it open, revealing yellowed papers, old photographs, and a faded map marked with a series of X's. There was also a letter, addressed to the finder. I unfolded it, the paper fragile and worn. "If you've come this far," it began, "then you understand that some truths aren't meant to stay buried. What you hold is part of a larger puzzle, one that others may seek to keep hidden. Choose carefully whom you trust." Chills ran down my spine. This was no longer just a curiosity. It was something bigger, the kind of bigger that gets people into trouble or worse. I left the caverns that day with the box tucked under my arm, a head full of questions, and the unsettling realization that whatever journey I'd stumbled onto was far from over. The weight of the metal box felt heavier than it should have as I placed it on my kitchen table, the rain outside tapping a steady rhythm against the windows. I sat there for a long while just staring at it. Part of me wanted to lock it away, pretend I hadn't found it. Another part, stronger, more insistent, knew there was no going back. I carefully laid out the contents. The photographs caught my attention first, black and white shots of places I didn't recognize. A weathered barn standing alone in a field, a rickety wooden bridge stretching over a foggy ravine, a crumbling stone archway covered in vines. Each photo had a date scribbled on the back, all from the late 1980s. Elliot's handwriting again. Was he the one who took them, or had someone else given them to him? Then there was the map. Faded, edges torn, it depicted a version of the town and surrounding areas that seemed decades old. The series of X's stretched beyond the caverns, marking locations I'd never paid much attention to. What struck me most, though, was a circle drawn in red ink around a spot near the outskirts. A place labeled simply as The Hollow. It wasn't on any modern map. I cross-referenced everything I could find online, but came up empty. Frustrated yet intrigued, I decided to visit the local library the next day. If anyone could help me navigate old records, it was Mrs. Caldwell, the librarian who'd been there since what felt like the dawn of time. "Back again?" She greeted me with a knowing smile as I stepped through the doors. "You always did have a nose for the dusty corners. What's got you curious this time?" I hesitated, then showed her the map. Her expression shifted from amusement to something more serious. "Haven't seen one of these in years," she murmured. "The Hollow, that's old talk. Most folks don't remember it or choose not to. There were rumors back then, stories of things better left alone. You sure you want to go digging?" I nodded. "I need to know." She sighed but led me to a back room filled with yellowed maps and brittle newspaper archives. Hours passed in a blur of dust and forgotten headlines until I stumbled across an article dated July 3rd, 1987. "Local man missing near Hollow grounds. Search called off." The photo was grainy, but the face was unmistakable, Elliot Harrow. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just some random curiosity anymore. It was a missing persons case, a story buried by time and silence, and I was now tangled in it. Mrs. Caldwell placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Be careful," she said softly. "Some doors, once opened, can't be closed." But it was too late for caution. The Hollow was calling, and I had no choice but to answer. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the map and those photographs burned behind my eyelids, the letters warning echoing louder with each passing hour. "Choose carefully whom you trust." Those words stuck to me like a second skin. By morning, I'd given up on rest entirely. Coffee brewed on the counter, black and bitter, while I spread out everything I'd gathered across my living room floor. The Hollow. It was just a name, but it pulled at me relentlessly. There was no denying it. I had to go. The drive out of town was quieter than usual. Roads stretched out like veins through the countryside, empty and winding under a blanket of gray clouds. I found myself glancing in the rearview mirror more than once, half expecting headlights trailing me, though none appeared. The closer I got to the marked location, The more the landscape seemed to shift, trees grew denser, their branches forming a natural canopy that dimmed the already overcast light. I parked at the edge of a dirt path barely distinguishable from the underbrush. The air here was heavier, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed with the essentials: flashlight, notebook, water, and the journal, and started down the trail. The forest closed around me, each step muffled by a carpet of moss and fallen leaves. Birds chirped somewhere overhead, but even their songs felt distant, swallowed by the woods. After what felt like an eternity, I came to a clearing. That's when I saw it. The hollow wasn't a place on the map, it was the map. A depression in the earth stretched before me, rimmed by massive oaks whose roots twisted into the soil like grasping fingers. In the center, half concealed by vines, stood the remnants of a stone structure, walls crumbling but still defiant against time's erosion. I approached cautiously. The ground dipped, forcing me to slide down the slope, boots skidding on loose dirt. Heart pounding, I reached the base and placed a hand on the cool stone. Up close, the structure revealed itself to be an entrance, arched and dark, like the open mouth of some ancient creature. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed caution, but curiosity had its hooks deep in me now. Inside, the air was cooler, thick with the scent of damp stone and something else, something metallic. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating faded carvings along the walls. Symbols, not letters or anything I could easily recognize, but geometric patterns looping in on themselves. I snapped photos, making a mental note to research them later. Deeper in, the passage widened into what once might have been a room. Broken wooden beams lay scattered, remnants of some long-forgotten support structure. And there, partially buried in the dirt, was another box, smaller than the first but heavier. I wiped away the grime and flipped the latch. Inside, more photographs, but these weren't decades old. They were recent, too recent. My blood ran cold. The first photo was of me, standing at the edge of the breathing caverns 2 days ago. The next, me in the library, talking to Mrs. Caldwell. Another, this morning, leaving my house. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs. Someone had been watching, following. This wasn't just about uncovering someone else's secrets. I was part of them now. A noise behind me, footsteps, close. I killed the flashlight and pressed myself against the wall, breath held tight. The steps grew louder, crunching over debris until they stopped just feet away. Silence stretched out, suffocating. Then, a voice, calm and measured. "You've gone too far. Turn back. This isn't your story to tell." I didn't recognize the voice, but the weight behind those words was unmistakable.
Danger.
Real and immediate. My mind raced. Options. Confront. Run. Hide. Survival instinct kicked in. I bolted, feet pounding the uneven ground, lungs burning as I scrambled up the slope. Branches clawed at me, dirt spraying behind with each desperate stride. The voice called after me, "This is your only warning." I didn't look back. Back at the car, I slammed the door and locked it, hands trembling as I fumbled the keys into the ignition. Tires spun, gravel flying as I sped away, heart hammering in my chest. Whoever that was, they knew me, knew where I lived, where I'd been. I wasn't just chasing a mystery anymore. I'd become part of it. Back home, blinds drawn tight and doors double-locked, I spread out the new photographs. Fear twisted in my gut, but underneath it, something else burned hotter. Determination. Someone wanted me to stop. That alone was reason enough to keep going. Choose carefully whom you trust.
No kidding.
This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. It's strange how easily a single decision can tilt your world. Sitting behind the wheel, the map spread across the passenger seat. I found my gaze locked on that red circle. The hollow. A place erased from memory, whispered in half-forgotten stories, and now pulling me with a gravity I didn't know how to resist. The air outside was thick with the kind of humidity that made everything feel slower, heavier. I rolled down the window, letting the warm breeze mix with my nerves. Was I chasing a ghost? Or was there something real buried beneath layers of dirt, time, and silence? The road leading toward the marked spot was one I hadn't taken in years, its asphalt cracked and lined with wildflowers clawing for space. Fields stretched out on either side, endless waves of grass rippling under a cloud-streaked sky. Every mile seemed to pull me deeper into a memory I wasn't sure was mine. I passed the remnants of old farmhouses, their skeletal frames standing stubborn against the wind. Once, these places had been alive with laughter, dinners on porches, dogs barking at passing cars. Now they were husks, forgotten, like the hollow itself. My phone buzzed, another missed call from work. I silenced it, shoving the device into the glove compartment. Whatever was waiting out there mattered more than deadlines or emails piling up. It was about answers, maybe even about Elliot Harrow, the man whose handwriting had guided me through this twisted breadcrumb trail. Why him? Why now? I didn't know. But the weight of that journal in my backpack was undeniable, like a heartbeat reminding me I was onto something I couldn't abandon. The road narrowed, gravel crunching under the tires, until it stopped altogether. Just a dirt path ahead, framed by trees that stretched upward like cathedral arches. I killed the engine. Silence, except for the faint hum of cicadas and my own breathing, suddenly loud in the stillness. Backpack slung over my shoulder, map in hand, I stepped onto the path. Each footfall kicked up dust and stirred old leaves. The deeper I went, the thicker the forest became, sunlight breaking through in fractured beams that painted the world gold and green. And then I saw it, the clearing, or what was left of it. The ground dipped into a shallow basin overgrown with moss and weeds. In the center stood a structure, small stone, half collapsed under the weight of time. It reminded me of something ancient, a place where people might have once gathered for reasons long since lost. My heart pounded. This was it. The hollow. I circled the structure, fingers tracing the rough edges of stone until I found what I hadn't known I was looking for. A rusted iron handle, partially hidden beneath a tangle of ivy. A hatch. Kneeling, I tugged at it. Resistance. My pulse quickened as I braced myself and pulled harder. With a screech that echoed through the trees, it gave way, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. "This is insane," I whispered, but I swung my legs over the edge anyway. One rung at a time, metal groaning beneath my weight, I climbed down until my feet met solid ground. The air was cool, damp, filled with the scent of earth and something older, stone dust and decay. Flashlight on, beam cutting through the gloom, I moved forward. The walls closed in, rough-hewn rock pressing close, and every step seemed to swallow sound. I could hear my heartbeat, loud and insistent. Then a door, wooden, reinforced with iron bands, and carved with a symbol I didn't recognize. A circle intersected by a line, simple but deliberate. My hand hesitated on the latch. Once I opened it, there'd be no unseeing whatever lay beyond. Deep breath. I pushed. The room was small.
Bare walls.
Dust motes floating in the light. But what caught my eye was the table at the center. Papers spread across it, yellowed and curling at the edges. Maps, notes, sketches, and a tape recorder. Old, battered. I pressed play. Static crackled. Then a voice. Hoarse, urgent. Elliot's voice. "If you're hearing this, you found it." Took me long enough to piece it together, but they're watching now. Listening. Can't stay long. The hollow's not just a place. It's a door. And once it's open, things get complicated. Trust no one. Not even me. Especially not me. The recording ended with a click that echoed louder than it should have. I stood there, heart racing, questions spiraling. Who was watching? What door? And why would he warn me against trusting him? That's when I heard it, the faintest sound. Footsteps. Not mine. From above. I killed the flashlight. Breath caught in my throat. Ears straining. Silence again. Maybe I imagined it. Or maybe someone else was here. I should have turned back. Climbed that ladder and driven away. But curiosity, that damnable thing, pulled me deeper. One step. Another. Following the corridor that stretched beyond the room. My hand brushed against the wall for balance. Something about the air shifted cooler, tinged with the faintest trace of something metallic. And then, light, faint, flickering ahead. I moved toward it, heart hammering against my ribs. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, walls lined with shelves holding objects I couldn't begin to understand. Artifacts, strange instruments, notebooks filled with symbols and languages I didn't recognize. It was like stepping into a museum curated by someone whose idea of history didn't align with anything I'd ever known. On one of the shelves, a photograph, newer than the rest. I picked it up and froze. Me, standing outside the old parking lot. Yesterday. Same clothes, same posture. Taken from a distance. My stomach twisted. Someone had been following me. Watching. Just like Elliot said. I should have run. But instead, I turned the photo over. One word scrawled on the back in hurried handwriting. Run. And that's when the lights cut out. Darkness. Total. Suffocating. I spun, heart in my throat, reaching for the flashlight. But a hand closed over mine. Warm. Solid. Found you, a voice murmured. Not Elliot. Someone else. And just like that, my world tilted further off its axis.